Park Tae Jun, a comic artist born on September 3rd, 1985, has pretty much done everything he's ever set out to do. He's worked as a model, ran his own fashion brand, is an ex-live reality TV star as well as singer and artist, and he's currently a multi-millionaire CEO running one of the biggest webtoon production companies in Korea, pumping out a bunch of titles you may recognize or perhaps even read before, with his most popular work from 2014 being Lookism. And in the vast world of webtoons, Park Tae Jun has managed to separate himself from other creators by solidifying his position within the theme of school bullying. In the heart of his most popular series, Park Tae Jun lays a focus on school violence, something which Korea has struggled with for a long time and has had various headlines popping up of bullying-related suicides which sparked national outrage. This isn't something uncommon in Korean media, and we can see depictions of similar cases in many other series. But Park Tae Jun didn't just create a few good stories pertaining to bullying, he pretty much initiated an entire wave of webtoons to follow after him, continuing in the themes of delinquency and underdog narratives inspired by his own success. But how did he manage to create such a distinct genre within the webtoon industry? Why are his stories so enjoyable to read and globally recognized? How much of his creations are based on Korea's real-life school violence crisis? And just why is Gun Park so damn strong? With all the things he's done over the years, it might sound like he's some genius media industry plant, and he very well might be, but his life was not always perfect. Born into a less fortunate family in South Korea, Park's main form of entertainment and something he's always adored as a child were the comics his mother would rent for him. Through reading these comics, he discovered his love for drawing by copying over the pages he had access to, and this led to him deciding early on that he wanted to be a comic artist. However, while Park was growing up, the Korean manga publishing industry was suffering, and combined with his background, he decided that he just wouldn't be able to support himself financially if he chased after his dream. He did take comic majors for a little bit of time, but had to drop out because he just couldn't afford it. So his biggest concern growing up was to make as much money as possible and then start serializing later on in life. And so his money-making career started when a Korean variety show called Ultsong Generation began premiering on comedy TV. Ultsong is a Korean term used for best face to describe good-looking people. The goal of the show was to search for the real pretty faces among the hundreds of young people who claim to be Ultsong. The comedy series presented specifically chosen people known for creating a commotion on the internet for their good looks. A young Park Tae Jun joined Ultsong Generation in Season 2, 2009, and was put in the spotlight for his renowned looks, reappearing in 4 other seasons afterwards. In fact, Park Tae Jun was so popular, you can still find old videos of him on YouTube that vary from fan-made photo montages, old Facebook advertisements, and just really odd stuff about him. It was also during this time that Tae Jun joined Flower Men Corporation, a band that debuted with the song Recipe of Love in October 8th of 2010. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like that band continued anymore because that is their only song ever released. And it's even more tragic knowing they will most likely never reunite ever, as Lee Chi-hoon, one of the band members whom Park Tae Jun was seen kissing earlier, unfortunately passed away in 2020 due to acute blood poisoning. While starring in Ultsong Generation, Park Tae Jun ended up gaining a lot of popularity, and his Cyworld page had recorded over 2 million visitors. Using his newly found fame, Park started his own online store called Aboki Fashion in 2010, directed at men's fashion for the ages of 10 to 20. Using his face to his advantage, Park modeled for his own brand alongside his younger brother Park Hyung-suk, and the company went strong till June of 2020 when Aboki Fashion finally dissolved, and Park Tae Jun personally left earlier in 2018 to focus on his webtoons. Now, after working all of these odd jobs, Park happened to stumble across a newly emerging platform that sung back to his original dreams of being a comic artist, and like many other creators at the time, he decided to take a leap of faith and submit his work for review. Webtoon as a media has come so far, with so many series getting adaptations in recent times, and many announcements of new series coming out. Solo Leveling has been doing extremely well, and with its recent Season 2 runtime, I've been seeing insane glaze before the seasons even had a chance to finish. In 2020, Webtoons combined sales topped 1 trillion won, and they have secured a spot as a foundation for Korea's storytelling industry. But how did such a newly emerging medium actually start? Before Webtoons and internet pirate sites, there was a time when people would read actual physically printed comic books. However, during 1997, Korea was hit by the Asian financial crisis, which affected people's affordability to buy comics, leading most to rent instead. To only add more harm to the matter, in the following year, Korea ended its censorship of Japanese media, and as a result, manga became a big rival for Korea's comic industry. Before this crisis, there were 200,000 Korean comics published annually, with over 80% of them being sold. However, during the crisis, this plummeted to only 20,000 comics published, barely half of those selling. With the introduction of high-speed internet for comic fans to scan, translate, and share their comics for free, rental stores began to close, and Korea's comic industry ended up on its last legs. Thankfully, however, the internet didn't kill the comic industry and actually managed to save it through innovative tech startups like N4 and Comic Plus. At first, webtoons derived from the words web and cartoon were produced only as a hobby, with artists publishing them by their own means on their personal websites. The most important part of history here, however, was 2004, when Dom launched Dom Comics World, the most successful platform of the 2000s, and the following year Naver launched its competitor, Naver Webtoon, signifying the start of the Webtoon era. More comics were released each year, and many of them laid the grounds for adaptations that would take the big screens and formulate a lot of Korea's most popular media. In 2014, Naver Webtoon marked its first year of overseas expansion as it launched its services in the United States. This also happened to be an important year for our artist Park Tae Jun, as this was when he initially started publishing Lookism. Pre-2017 Webtoon was really unique as there weren't that many series and the medium wasn't close to the monolith it is today. But it had a lot of recognizable long-running series that you've probably read or at least heard about. Among the various webtoons at the time, school settings were an extremely common thing to see, not unique to Lookism alone. Series like Noblesse, Girls of the Wilds, God of High School, and Windbreaker all took place in high school. Although two of them are basically just complete fantasy genres and school isn't really important at all, but the point is that not many of them were centered around bullying specifically. Park's signature style aims at school hierarchies, power dynamics, and the most riveting fights the genre's ever seen. Lookism was arguably one of the first school bullying-centered manhwas, the only one I know of before it being Dokko from 2012, which is a lot less known, but similarly focuses on high school gang violence, bullying, and also has an insanely long connected story. There were a few early running series that ran under similar ideas to Lookism and Dokko, like Shark, Supernova, or The Greatest Outcast. However, all three of these series released in 2016, 2 years after Lookism, and are all pretty different within their own rights. As this video is being made in 2025, there was an insane plethora of these series circulating everywhere, from retired, overpowered mercenaries going back to school, and stories following the tribulations of homeless high schoolers. Yet, Park Tae Jun has claimed his spot on the hill among all these other series, not only still pumping out action-packed chapters of Lookism, but expanding his horizons and continually creating more and more series pertaining to this subgenre of school fights. Now, if you've ever seen anything about Lookism, especially stuff posted by its fans, you've probably seen Brazilian funk edits of Ultra Instinct Daniel, or just any of its recent fight panels, and for good reason, because the fights are fucking awesome. And that's pretty much what it's been known for, this extremely over-the-top, action-oriented series centered around high schoolers throwing nuclear fists at each other. But it wasn't always just a Unite the Four Crews gang war brawl between superpowered teenagers. Lookism revolves around Daniel Park, a high school student who gets bullied and blessed with a second body where he can swap to experience a vastly different life from his old one. In the beginning, it's a unique perspective, an idea that resonated with Korean readers specifically and explored the drastic differences those lived through based on appearances. Park Tae Jun chose bullying as his theme based on his experiences as a child, connecting his own personal story to Daniel. Like I've said, Park Tae Jun grew up in a poorer family. He was bullied as a child, and instead of facing his problems head on, he ran away and moved schools. He ended up putting a lot of effort into changing his appearance, which led him to where he is today. His life and what he's gone through personally are clearly drawn within the pages of Lookism and reflect how he perceives his past. The title itself holds the meaning of prejudice based on beauty standards and discrimination on those who don't reach that standard. Lookism is a pretty big topic in Korea, being a true reflection of Korea's deeper societal hierarchies. A great example of this is how job applicants in Korea must attach a profile photo to their resumes as a formal qualification for employment. A 2017 poll found that 81.1% of part-time students believe that appearance influenced their employment search, and around 40% responded that they had been victims of lookism when job hunting. Imagine not being able to break into a barrier entry job for a company you are more than qualified for, but not getting in just because someone who looks like an Instagram model applied after you and was perceived as a better candidate because of their face. To make matters worse, those who experience higher rates of look-based prejudice generally plan to receive or have already undergone procedures. Now, when Park comes up with ideas for his stories, he visualizes what Korean readers specifically would enjoy as an audience. In Korea, cosmetic surgeries are extremely prominent, having the largest ratio per capita in 2024. And with this current obsession over visual status, he was able to get a base idea to build up his first creation. Having transferred to a new school and living a dual life between his bodies, the first 100 chapters of Lookism go through Daniel's day-to-day interactions with other characters. It's a slow start with very little conflict, but most of the early arcs still maintain a focus on the central idea of Lookism, and slowly introduce characters that remain relevant till the later chapters. These include plotlines that show and place an emphasis on how people are treated differently based on their appearances or vice versa. Like how Daniel gets an offer from an agency for singing when Duke, a less visually appealing but more talented singer, doesn't. Or in the bootcamp arc when a criminal avoids suspicion from others because he's just super hot, while the counselor who actually cares for the kids but is extremely unattractive saves the kids in the end but is still treated poorly. Early Lookism is built throughout these small stories which are typically resolved through fighting and that slowly introduce and develop characters for later on. But the series makes a change that I don't think anyone saw coming. Originally a personal journey about Daniel exploring bullying, beauty, and social prejudice, genuinely just becomes a gang-fighting martial arts manhwa, which is so fucking cool. The story starts changing around chapter 84 when we are introduced to a gambling site for high schoolers, run by a gang that basically tricks kids into losing a ton of money. Jake Kim, the man running the whole operation, is the leader of Big Deal, one of the 4 major crews relevant to the story. They are the 4 most central and important gangs within the Lookism universe, and they are basically the whole moving force for the rest of the series. Just in this single arc alone, fighting is shown to be more central, and it's a small example of how the stakes slowly rise within each arc. We continue by following Daniel and his friends' interactions with all the 4 crews, and each arc just gets better and better, more intricate plot lines with more fights, higher stakes, and backstories that flesh out specific characters. It's like the whole first 100 chapters, Park Tae Jun was just setting up his own world and characters that he could take and put into these massive criminal schemes and fights that are extremely entertaining to read and exciting to watch unfold. One of my favorite early-ish arcs halfway through the series to me felt like a culmination of everything Park had been putting work towards, that arc being Hostel. Hostel is an arc that on the Webtoon site only takes 14 chapters, but there is a lot more setup and backstory before it actually takes place that in reality it spans over 64 chapters. Starting from a very small arc on catfishes selling spit and stockings to perverts, escalates all the way up to this encounter that gathers a lot of the early main players into a massive all-out war brawl intertwined with a backstory of a single character who until now had only been on the sidelines. Reading this arc for the first time was what made Lookism one of my favorite webtoons in general, as Park's art style had finally settled down and evolved from the early stages and combined a lot of early storylines and characters that hadn't been explored yet. With a lot of awesome action, it's one of the greatest arcs in the series' 500 chapter runtime. And this is only one of the many major arcs that Lookism is capable of producing. There are a handful of these other storylines that I would consider to be quite enjoyable and entertaining to read simply by how much is happening within each of them. And I think what makes a lot of them amazing is how Park is able to build off of this already fleshed out world, creating something entirely different and unique. One of my all-time favorite arcs within the entire series has to be the Jake Kim backstory. Yes, the very Jake Kim that first introduced us into gangism and ran the illegal gambling site earlier, except now he's extremely handsome and we are diving into his past that shaped the way he is today. I love this backstory and many other similar backstories in Lookism for the simple reason that the characters who were once just characters instead become a vital part of the story, people who I personally root for and wish to succeed. Through the 17-chapter backstory, we learn more about Jake's upbringing, motivations, and connect back to over 200 chapters ago when we first met him, revealing truths that otherwise would have been ignored. Instead of being just some side villain that the cast already defeated, Park is able to bring him back and make him part of the world itself, and honestly make him one of the more likable characters. The guy who was once seen as a cruel and money-hungry crewhead blossoms into a kind, justice-upholding teenager who willingly goes on the path of destruction for those he cares about. This backstory literally made him one of my favorite characters in the series, and what I love is that it doesn't just fill me in on Jake alone, but a multitude of other characters that build up Lookism. Like Jake's foil Samuel Seo, who goes through this amazing mind-bending psychological shift of self-hatred and anger at himself for living a false reality, which is just fantastic to read through and makes his character so much more fun to watch going through the rest of the story. Instead of solely focusing on an individual, this backstory gave light to other important characters and even introduced new characters that would be extremely central to later arcs. It's like a power of Park to make every single person in the series somehow feel like a main character in their own right. Each backstory as an arc is good on its own, isolated as a single story, but it also benefits from the series' long runtime. Because these are all characters we know of, we've learned a little bit about them from the perspective of Daniel and the others, yet it's only through their backstories that we actually get a good view on who they are as people. And that's where gangism really shined for me. Behind the over-the-top fights and aura farming panels, the characters and their goals are just things I want to know more about. They're memorable characters even if I haven't touched on the series for a while. I still know the names and characteristics of most of them because when you spend like 400 chapters in this world, you get sucked into the chaos it creates. I like viewing the story as Park Tae Jun finding his footing as a creator. From slice of life high school to all-out gang wars involving various different characters is definitely odd, but it's not a random nor sudden change. Fighting is something that persists in the story from the very beginning, like Zack being a boxer, Daniel being set up with the most perfect body, thuggish characters being introduced early on who are extremely important later. I can see the argument made that it's become a completely different series in its own right, which is completely true to say. But I think this is what Park's end goal was going to be regardless of what he wrote, and it just happened to take place in the Lookism universe. Park has been a shonen fan for a long time, idolizing series like Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest, and Yamikin Ushijima-kun. If you look at any of these series, you'd wonder, how the hell did he come up with the premise of writing Lookism? When viewing Park's life in its entirety, Lookism as a series starts to feel like a culmination of his actual experiences. It takes a look at the things that have been emotional pillars in Park's personal life, like running away from his problems as a child, his work experience as a star, and how his own appearance has affected his career. However, his prime inspiration and motive for writing has been the comics he's read since childhood. The shonen genre, which he holds dear to himself, is sprinkled in and tested with the early chapters, truly formatting itself later on. And now what Lookism has become to this day, as I see it, is just what he's always wanted to create. It was originally published onto Comic Challenge, a Naver platform for amateur artists to show off their work, but it ended up exceeding all expectations, picking up close to 1 million views worldwide, gaining favor from Korean, Indonesian, and Thai readers, eventually being officially published in Line Webtoon. 11 years later to this very day, it still continues on and maintains its popularity as one of the most read webtoons on the platform, even getting an anime adaptation by Netflix in 2022, the first time Netflix has directly produced an animation based on a Korean comic. Now, with all this success, PTJ didn't stop at creating Lookism, and now he has written multiple series, many of which are related, to create what readers call the Park Tae Jun Connected Universe, or just the PTJ-verse. Since his debut, Park Tae Jun has had his own team of assistants who work together with him to produce his works, and in 2017 he eventually founded his own company called Park Tae Jun Comics. It has 140 employees as of 2023, and as of 2025 has 47 official works produced according to their website. Most people know of Park Tae Jun Comics and their company from his personal works, which he is directly involved in and are part of the same universe with Lookism as its core. The other series which are under the name of Park Tae Jun Comics are either external author collaborations created by in-house authors or simply distributed under the brand. A lot of the more popular series that PTJ has been making since the founding of his company all fall under this broad category of school violence. Following along this trend, the school violence subgenre has flourished, pumping out a bunch of series that use similar ideas, each with their own take on the genre. Doko, which I mentioned earlier, is one of the first major school revenge manhwa that was released before Lookism, following the case of a student who returns to school to defeat the bullies that killed his brother. This idea of extreme revenge has been a prominent idea in the genre, yet interpreted differently by a bunch of other series. Like Neon Revenge, which is told through the perspective of a YouTube channel that live streams bully hunts, or even Rooftop Swordmaster, which also falls under this revenge category, even though it's just utterly insane. A lot of these series utilize the similar shonen idea that Park himself has integrated into his works, the strength progression that follows a bullied boy going through a miraculous breakthrough or change in character that leads to him facing the unjust treatment from his classmates. And this core idea is taken, balled up into a mesh of different perspectives, and then thrown by these creators to create their idealistic series based off of their own experiences. And in this genre alone, Park has basically mastered this formula to its best potential, writing multiple ideas and also publishing them through his company, basically creating his own empire. However, with the production of a multitude of series, he has faced criticism regarding the repetitiveness of the subject matter. His reply was simply that he's aware and is attempting his best to renovate the genres so everyone can enjoy the production he publishes. With each new series, he reworks the stories so though they might fall under similar settings, each series itself is distinct enough to have its own identity. I like them for the action-tastic mess that they are, as well as the original twist each story begins with. My Life as a Loser follows a bullied victim, and like Lookism uses the idea of a body swap in addition to time travel, putting the bully into the victim's body. Questism follows another underdog bullied protagonist who gets superpowers from a real-life video game panel like Solo Leveling, and Juvenile Offender is an extreme revenge story and breakdown of the unjust minor laws in Korea. All of them are school action fantasy, taking place in a similar setting, but centered around different ideas that make each story somewhat unique. Another criticism, or rather something he's just notoriously known for, is reusing art. You know, I don't really mind too much from an efficiency standpoint. I'm sure it helps him and his studio produce the series much smoother, and I honestly never noticed it when I read the series for the first time, only recognizing it after I learned that it's something he did. The only problem I could see with this is that the entire story is based off of the action, and if you're reusing the action scenes, which he does do, it can, ruin some of the moments. Sometimes he uses it to be funny, to exaggerate a panel or expression by a character, which is, it's fine, that's great, that's good. But it's crazy when you reuse a character from one comic into another comic and just straight up copy and paste them multiple times anytime something important is happening. It's actually kind of funny, honestly. I don't really mind that. I actually noticed it recently when rereading the Jake Kim backstory, when I noticed that one of the characters, every time he spoke, it was just the same image of his face. Again and again and again on the same fucking page. He has also faced criticism early on when writing Lookism before it became Gangism, and was negatively reviewed for promoting and glorifying school violence. But obviously that's just not an issue now, as that's just a central core of its identity now, and honestly without the fighting it probably wouldn't be as big as it is today. Those are all other people's criticisms of Park Tae Jun's works, and I have some personal things to say about his stuff. Now, I read Lookism a while ago and was reading it weekly for a decent amount of time, but as I've said before, it's been running for over 10 years now, and the sheer amount of content the series has is completely inflated. In comparison to other manhwa, I feel like a regular Lookism chapter is just abnormally longer than the medium's average, and there's also just a lot of fucking characters and lore happening. Now, I've said that Lookism was going to end up as a fighting series no matter what, based off of Park's own experiences and inspiration from shonen manga, and I still stand by that statement. I don't think the shift was negative. A lot of the current readers enjoy it because of the way it's written now. But I will say that the change was very different in the way that characters were kind of tossed aside for a long while, or just end up completely underused in the new settings of Lookism. It's just a result of a shift in storytelling and focus. With the nature of the series now revolving around action, it leaves behind characters who are less relevant to this fight-centered series. It's the same reason why I can't remember the last time I saw any of these high schoolers back in a school setting, which in turn allows for higher levels of violence overall. These aren't bashes against the series. I still like the Gangism arcs, and I do think it's a fun read, especially with how they've expanded on various characters and gone further into the universe's lore with earlier generations. But the fact that it's taken this long to get even close to Charles Choi is ridiculous to me, man. The Workers arc was cool, but why did there have to be 4 goddamn affiliates? How are Gun and Goo still hovering around like gods? What the fuck is James Lee's issue? Just so many things that seem like they can get answered easily. It's like Park's ceiling for the universe just gets raised every single time something happens so he can keep the story going. And this power creep issue isn't only a problem in Lookism either. I think it's an issue that's spread to his other works as well, especially those in the connected universe, which very well may be a result of Lookism's influence. The most notable example of this, and honestly something that upset me while reading, was Questism. Now, Questism is a fun read. It's pretty brain dead, and there's a lot of stuff that I think it's lacking as a series, but it's enjoyable to watch these guys throw down, and the game aspect makes it somewhat interesting. Following Kim Soo-yeon, who gets video game powers after being a bully victim, the system basically guides him to unite Gangbuk, a part of Seoul. The unique part of this series is that the main character sees everything through game stats, so we get these panels of all these characters showcasing strength, intelligence, endurance. And this makes for obvious and clear strength progression for characters, which is great. It's like solo leveling or basically any other tower dungeon manhwa except in a school setting. The problem with this is that very early on in the series, we already get examples of S-class stats, and while I'm reading, I'm thinking to myself, damn, we're already seeing dudes with maxed out strength or speed. This must be some tough stuff. But then the further the story progresses, the stats start changing again, and instead of S-class stats, it becomes S+, or SS, then SSS, and I'm like, wow, they've maxed out the S-class. These are guys with like endgame level strength, and just when I thought they've already reached that endgame, there's even more stat levels like SSR and SR, and I can't even tell the difference between the two. This is the most obvious and clear depiction of power creep in Park's works. It's not something that ruins the story for me. When we get cameos of Lookism characters in Questism, their stats are so high that it's not even recognizable within the system. Like, what are his stats supposed to be? 7 S's? It allows for some really cool moments. It's just slightly annoying to me. Not a deal breaker, especially when I read the series for its enjoyment and simple action. Just something that I think reflects a problem within the connected universe. In Lookism, you meet a new bad guy who is supposedly like a super strong bad guy, and then maybe the bad guy beats someone up, and I'm like, whoa, this is the new strength cap for the universe. This is some end level stuff. And then he gets beat by a different character. Like, it's cool, there's a ton of characters that all fight and have different styles and look phantasmal while doing it, but I feel like every time something actually important is going to happen, I just end up getting blue-balled. The fights are still good though, and I mean, that's what I read it for. The action is enjoyable, the art is nice, I think a lot of the storylines are genuinely good. It's just because there's so much content, it feels like some stuff just isn't progressing. If that makes sense at all, that's just my personal rant about Park's works. I still love his series, obviously. If I didn't, I would not be making this video. Now, despite these criticisms, Park Tae Jun's works have all done really well, and he even has articles talking about the buildings he's bought through his company relative to how much he's actually making. His company's success is a reflection of his work ethic and philosophy behind storytelling. But what is that philosophy exactly? Park Tae Jun claims that his biggest opponent and what he's trying to compete against isn't other webtoons, but rather social media, attempting to get readers switching from short-form content like TikTok and Instagram Reels to reading his webtoons instead. In a 2022 interview, Park Tae Jun was asked what he believed is the most important aspect when it came to planning a project for a new series. He said that it's essential to have an idea that's compelling from beginning to end, bringing up examples like lookism, which uses a focus on body swapping, a concept that isn't completely new to media, but the idea of switching between an original dull body and a handsome stylish body is more entertaining. Stating that the key concept and idea behind the series has to be something that settles itself as a core identity within the work and maintains the story to be interesting for a long time. This is evident in lookism, which still hasn't explained Daniel's body swapping phenomenon over the past 500 chapters. But it's important to note that within all his series, he has one core idea that is genuinely interesting. If you take a look at other standout manhwas in the school violence genre, you'll see that many have adopted a similar style of writing to Park's, attempting to individualize themselves within the first few chapters. Their beginning serves not only as a hook to grab readers' attention, but also to keep them invested for later chapters, and keep readers viewing their series each week. True Education stands out as a series in the bully genre for flipping the script and focusing on a government-funded organization that uses physical violence to reform extreme bullies. It stands out for its unique twist on the genre and newly formed perspective on teachers' rights and protection, something that is based on an actual real-life issue in Korea. Weak Hero is one of the older webtoons that helped give birth to this genre and has its own unique style while still staying true to its core of delinquency. Instead of reworking the genre in a fantasy way or through differing societal perspectives, it just gives us the story of a small, frail boy who is also ruthlessly violent and merciless towards his enemies. This simple gimmick and hook, which is introduced right from the get-go, grabs viewers' attention and leads them into the regular style of the genre, with larger-scale school battles, bully organizations, and punk-ass fights. This broad story structure is just a result of publication and attributed to how we as people consume media. Whether it be in Korea's manhwa industry, Japanese manga, or any other weekly serialized publications, stories need to stand out within the first few chapters to avoid being axed, and show their potential towards the future, able to keep readers attentive and willing to support. But no matter what the twist is or how different the stories are, the one thing that Park Tae Jun readers keep coming back for is the action aspect of his comics. This guy writes the most amazing fights I've read in webtoons. I don't know if it's the story, the characters, or just the god-awful expressions that each person wears when they hit or get hit. Something about Park Tae Jun's fights just scratched this itch in my animal brain that I can't explain. Lookism has been one of my favorite webtoons of the past 5 years, even though it's gone completely off the rails in how the story originally was like. In this school fighting genre that currently houses a ton of series with similar plots, Park Tae Jun has fucking carved his place by producing banger after banger, topping the charts of different days, and just cementing himself as the true king of school violence manhwa. There simply isn't someone else that has been doing it for this long and produced so many different series, and not only did he initiate the spark that would continue series to follow after him, he's still doing it to this day. I mean, Lookism has been going on for 11 years at this point. It's been going on since the beginning days of Webtoon and has outlived some of the better, older Webtoons that finished a while ago. And now, even though Park Tae Jun is known for these types of series, he's more recently trying to showcase the wider spectrum of potential genres that he can do, transitioning from school-related production to action and more. PTJ Comics has dropped titles like Teenage Dragon, stating that the company is in progress of coming up with a fantasy and historic webtoon. And although these are interesting to me and I'd love to see more of what he's capable of creating, in the end his works caught my attention the most when he was tackling issues that he perceived to be real to him. Bullying's a pretty talked about problem among Korean media, and it's somewhat of a reflection on how the country feels is a prominent social issue within their schools. Though the manhwa versions of these experiences are greatly exaggerated, they still reflect the increasing problem of bullying which the country has been battling for a while. And though it might be an overemphasis, it still shows the overall sentiment that the citizens of South Korea feel about this very real issue. But the more I researched Korean bullying, the more I found that it's less of a school problem and rather a reflection of Korea's social class issues as a whole. Earliest reports of bullying in Korea date back to the 1950s, with articles titled "School Violence Should Be Kicked Out from School" and "The Classroom is Shaking with Fear from Violence." Both of them describe brutal fights between large groups of students with the use of weapons, student extortion including attacking, and even cases of students being killed. From the 1960s onward, articles show that after Park Chung-hee's military regime took over, he tried to eradicate school violence using governmental authority and power, creating a police organizational map to deal with school gangsters, treating them in similar ways as adult organized criminal gangs. Now this seems like a crazy scenario to treat the school gangs like fully recognized adult criminals, but if it's like this, then the manhwas don't even feel like that much of an overplay on what was happening in real life. An example from 1963 highlights a group of violent students consisting of 20 to 30 members who bullied good students, tried hitting a teacher with a stone, and brought bats to attack a different teacher at school. Park's military regime attempted to eradicate these sorts of violent circles from South Korean society, and the important thing here is that the word eradicate used by Park's military regime is similarly used later down the line by various other groups to describe their approach to solving school violence. And though the 1950s to 60s is characterized by these large group fights, for the South Koreans this was not a big issue at the time and was drowned out by other things like poverty alleviation and economic development. But the biggest change occurred within the 1980s, when group bullying and juvenile delinquency was seen as a pressing societal problem. And a big factor in this was Japan's ijime phenomenon, where victims of ijime or bullying were committing suicide. The Japanese media presented to the public students' suicide notes, which described their cries for help, piquing the interest and fear of South Korean citizens, creating the terms Iljin and Wangta. An article from 1982, "Scary Teenagers Are Getting More Cruel," highlighted the way students were perceived as becoming more cruel and vicious. The most fascinating characteristic noted was the trend of youth crime becoming more organized, with students creating a circle organization and acting collectively like gangsters to engage in devilish things. A great example of how this history has directly influenced bully manhwa is the series Devil Returns to School Days. The manhwa details our main character falling into a coma and reversing time, going through a revenge story on those who wronged him. Why is this important? Because in the series there's a huge emphasis on influential powers and abuse of money. It also includes a secret organization called the Golden Circle, which, like in the 1980s, is an example of youth crime becoming more organized, also what the article called as a literal circle group. This manhwa focuses a lot not just on the Golden Circle, but also on the general corruption and imbalance of Korean society. It's a similar theme that can be seen with a lot of other similar manhwa, placing an emphasis on organizations' abuse of money and power, and their influence towards real-life politics. Park's own main series Lookism has 4 central gangs to the plot that are each controlled by a mega CEO conglomerate guy, and each of these gangs have the influential power to own underground fighting rings, human traffic, and just a bunch of awesome ideas that Park Tae Jun decided to write. In the 80s, these groups would involve initiation rituals like slashing their palms with a knife to pledge loyalty to their circle, and to enforce authority, senior members would hit their juniors with baseball bats. With reports stating that they carried around pipes, knives, saws, and hydrochloric acid to threaten or extort from people, with cases of them sexually assaulting female students or factory workers. Groups like these are central to bully delinquent manhwa stories, creating an easy antagonist that can clearly be drawn and obstacles for the main groups to overcome. However, in reality, the Iljin groups are way less common, and though they do exist, most bullying in Korea is psychological, focusing on ostracization, exclusion, and emotional manipulation, rather than jumping someone and caving their face in until they're 2 steps away from death's door. It's not like organized teen gangs are particularly bad in South Korea alone. Issues like this persist everywhere in the world. However, there are a few key characteristics that can be connected from the South Korean circle bully members to international studies of bullying, such as coming from an economically deprived background, having a poor study record, and having one or both parents missing. Those who bully tend to be drawn disproportionately from lower socioeconomic status families with poor child-rearing techniques and are unsuccessful in their studies. Throughout the 1990s, the media gave more attention to school violence being on the rise, and eventually by 1997, the increasing brutalization of violence in schools was seen as a huge social issue. What brought this countrywide attention was specific cases and incidents like an elementary school student cutting out the tongue of his junior classmate, or a third-year high school student stabbing a classmate who had once bullied him. It was cases like these that led to the establishment of the Juvenile Protection Act in 1997. However, the journalist of this article I'm basing all of the information on believes that legalistic measures like this would not provide a fundamental solution to the problem of bullying. The actual cause of school violence is believed to be deeply rooted in harmful home, school, and social environments. And with this fundamental base idea, there's two important distinctions that the article makes to define bullying: the idea of juvenile delinquency and the idea of juvenile justice. In 2010, a study by Bernard and Kurlishik focused on the idea of delinquency, trying to understand what delinquency specifically is and how it originates. The first view, juvenile delinquency, positions delinquency as acts committed by self-centered adolescents, people who just do it for the love of the game. They harm others through lack of self-control and don't care about those around them. The second view, juvenile justice, understands juvenile delinquency as a cry for help instead, seeing them as troubled youngsters who are a result of their environment stemming from abusive and neglectful homes. It's through these two views that we get a perception of the individual delinquent, the first view seeing them as a criminal rather than a child who has been cast aside by society. In a similar fashion, we see how this idea was enforced early on in Korea's attempt to eradicate said bullying, literally treating them like actual gang members. The second view perceives the delinquents as more of a child rather than a hardened criminal, and this is an important part of the article because it's believed to affect people's perception of juvenile justice and how the laws of this world either favor or halt the growth of these individuals, affecting their transition into society. Those who follow the first view and see them as fully fledged criminals tend to favor forms of punishment, deterrence, and security-based policies which were found to be the least effective. Those are the methods which Korea has been implementing the most, in the past attempting to eradicate bullying through the police force, or more recently increasing security measures. Those who view the juvenile as a victim are more likely to favor reformation and rehabilitation-based policies, addressing the juvenile's cry for help and the cause behind their actions, which was found to be the most effective type of policy. Even after the implementation of the Juvenile Protection Act, similar cases would continue on in later years, and on December 20th of 2011, the initial spark that ignited the current media's attention and scrutiny towards school violence occurred through the bully suicide of 13-year-old middle school student Kwon Sung-min. Specifically, the suicide note Sung-min left behind before he jumped off of the 7th-floor family apartment building, which detailed the acts of bullying and violence he was subjected to. Water torture, ignition of his arm, use of an electric cable as a dog collar to drag him around, ordering him to eat food off the floor, beaten both at school and in his own home, extortion, forcing him to work a part-time job for further extortion, manipulation of his exam results, destruction of his textbooks, in addition to verbal, emotional, and physical aggression. Now, this is a horrible bullying case, and followed by it were several other bully-related suicides and attempts. However, it's hard to clarify whether Korea genuinely has a bullying problem, especially something that's worse compared to other countries. I mean, it's obviously still an issue, these cases are terrible, but how bad is it actually? Well, according to the government in 2013, it was so bad it was labeled as one of the 4 social evils in which they promised to quickly remove from South Korean society. As one of the 4 social evils, it is included among domestic violence, sexual violence, and food-related crimes. So clearly to the government, bullying is something that needs to be halted immediately. However, that's what they've been saying for the past 60 years as well. Though they might not have been focusing on it with as much presence as today, it's still so talked about now. A politician from President Park's party cited government data to declare school violence as becoming more serious year by year. This data showed that in the first semester of 2012, there were 17,866 school bullies, which jumped 32% from 2011 and 79% from 2010. You might think, wow, that's a big increase in school bullies each year. I guess it must be true that Korea has a really bad bullying problem. But this data was meant to push the idea that bullying was spiraling out of control in the country and needed urgent government intervention. The statistics used were calculated on 2.5 bullies per 1,000 students, or only 0.25% of students classified as bullies. So basically the jump in percentage from 2010 to 2012 shows that the increase in bullying is definitely a lot, but it's also just a really small portion of students in the first place, and also proof of the government using selective data to push the idea that bullying is on the rise. And so to try and fix this issue in 2013, President Park attempted to strengthen public security, installing more surveillance cameras at schools, adding security personnel, checkups by police officers, anti-bullying education programs, and an increase in punishment for perpetrators. However, as we've found, a lot of these measures, which are an increasing factor in punishment, are the first view of juvenile identity, and a higher level of punishment simply doesn't address the root cause behind the issue. It also has to be noted that this false data that Park's party used to invoke school violence on the rise, and her attempts to fix this issue like her father, did not work. Partly because, it doesn't really match what I've been talking about this whole time, but mainly because she got arrested in a massive corruption scandal and kicked out of government, which I just found out while editing this video somehow. I have no idea how socially unaware I am. It's insane. When the fuck did this happen? Anyways, this kind of just further pushes the idea of this whole sentiment surrounding the bullying problem and South Korea's ongoing struggle with authority, hierarchy, and abuse of power. A middle school teacher observed that most bullies originated from dysfunctional families, recognizing that it's a matter of family and society, not just individuals. So if the problem doesn't lie within the individual bully themselves, and the bullies are actually victims, who is to blame? I could blame the parents and the misguided environment they raised their children in, however they aren't at fault either. Rather, it'd be more just to say that Korea's society as a whole breaks down and reflects its cracks through a school environment. A look into bullying is merely a fraction of a problem that envelops all of Korea. It's merely a byproduct of Korea's rigid class hierarchy where status, wealth, and appearance determine your worth. However, this is ultimately a problem of the country that I would personally have no idea on how to fix. I'm not a fucking saint. The data shows that bullying isn't a particularly big problem in South Korea. It's not outstandingly worse than other countries, but data isn't going to be representative of something that can fly under the radar very often, especially if a lot of the bullying that occurs is social exclusion or psychological, something which just isn't easy to come across evidence for. What this results in is various victims who don't have a medium or way to speak up for themselves and end up suffering in silence. Park Tae Jun has unironically brought up a lot of overseas attention to the bullying in South Korea through his excessively violent action sequences that echo across all his works. Though he's not intending to write about social issues, they somehow find their way into his works through the very real issues he's experienced himself. The struggle to survive, to climb the social ladder, and to experience the privilege of good looks are all reflections of his own life and all bleed into his stories, pushing his characters through the righteous shonen-like storylines that he has been inspired by since he started reading. His works, though quite simple and straightforward, expose truths that speak from PTJ's own life, and it's how so many foreign readers have been able to connect with his stories, intentionally or not. By turning his style into a blueprint, capitalizing on his opportunity to write comics forever, and starting his own company, he has pioneered a subgenre that other creators now follow as well. And whether he meant to or not, he gave voice to a generation of people around the world who saw themselves in his stories, while simultaneously building a brand that turned his pain into power and violence into art.
It's going to get better.
Thank you so much for watching. Making this was really fun. If you haven't read his works, you definitely should if you like this type of stuff. There's also just some extra facts I found out that I couldn't find anywhere else to put in the video. And yeah, that's everything from me. Thank you. Bye.